Okay, I'm going to read, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10 verses in this section that we're looking at. I'm on again, what page here? Sort of page 8 in my, I don't know if the digital version corresponds to the hard copy. Do you have at the top of page 8, then wealthy leader answered? Okay. So we already looked at this one. I'm going to try to go through all 10, and then tonight and maybe next finish them up because they're so intertwined. I'm going to jump around a little bit to a few. 此事要解灭，多闻者境界，我为人宣说，人尽应听说。So the verses begin, that's the verse. The bliss of still quiescence, the state of one of much learning, I for the humane one will not expound. Would that the humane one be attentively receptive. So basically this is a polite return by wealthy leader bodhisattva, who's now the speaker. And he's actually praising Manjushri bodhisattva, kind of describing the qualities of a Buddha and a bodhisattva, one who has entered this state. Still quiescence means everything's really cool. There's nothing really disturbing you anymore. I mean, it can be used for an expression of nirvana, but if you take nirvana out of just a technical term and describe it, it's a state where there's no more suffering at all. And that's why it's blissful. But it's a bliss that doesn't come and go based on conditions. It's a bliss that is constant because you've seen through it and put down what needs to be put down. I for the humane one, meaning I, universal, whether a leader, bodhisattva, for the humane one. Now it could be referring to Manjushri here, but it could also be referring for, almost on behalf of the Buddha, will now expound. But it seems to be saying, listen attentively, Manjushri. Now, of course, why we say this is polite is obviously, who's listening, who's talking here. At the worst, they're equals. At the best, Manjushri's understanding and wisdom is a little more, or however you want to measure that, than yet they're being. So obviously, the attentively be receptive. It's a very interesting phrase. You see it throughout the text, and it can mean just like listen up, pay attention. But attentively receptive means to really empty the heart and mind of all graspings, cravings, afflictions, wandering, meandering thoughts, jealousies, grudges. I mean, it really means to be open, to receive, to receptive. It's like you're a vessel. And the emptiness of the vessel allows something to go in. So it's more than just listen up. It's a kind of contemplative receptivity. And then he goes on, and these are the verses, and I'll read them through. Observe the body in detail throughout. What of it is actually me? One who understands in this way comprehends there is no self to be found. This body is falsely established without a place to which it belongs. By closely examining the body, one fathoms that nothing about it can be held on to. Skillfully observe the body, clearly viewing each part. Realize that all dharmas are empty illusions, or all phenomena are empty illusions. And you will not generate mental distinctions or give rise to mental distinctions. Who causes this life to arise? And what causes its decline and demise? Like a whirling wheel of fire, its beginning and end cannot be known. Wise ones are able to observe the impermanence of all that exists, and how all dharmas are empty, devoid of self or a self, forever detached from all characteristics. So let me pause there, and that's the first 6 in this series. And now, when I was looking at this today and trying to piece it together, it can be done 1 through 10 consecutively, but I'm going to move around a bit. So I'm going to start where we kind of mentioned last week, but begin again with this idea, because the Bodhisattva Manjushri, on behalf of all the Bodhisattvas, and by extension, all people who have the privilege and the good roots to be sitting and listening to this text now, in the past, or in the future, hopefully, this will continue to go on. We're doing it here Friday night in Berkeley, right, in 2024. Man, this text goes way, way back. So this has been continuously brought into the world. These sounds, and probably various translations of it, have been going on for a very long time. This is like the original sounds of something really deep. The clarification question was basically beginning on the idea, okay, so living beings are not really living beings, they're basically empty, then why bother to use and employ so many different methods to teach and transform them? And then my teacher makes a comment at the time. He says, in order there to be teaching and transforming, there must be some entity to teach and transform, right? It's using logic. On the other hand, if one sees living beings as existent, then one is not seeing them as empty. One still has an attachment. So now he's posing the seemingly question here. If there's no living beings to speak of, why put out the effort? If there are living beings and you think there are existing living beings, then you're stuck with a kind of an attachment. Either way, you won't end up doing it. So, in thinking this through, there's possible ways of looking at why this is happening. The first one is not very flattering, and you probably wouldn't think of it, or you wouldn't say it, so I'm going to think it and say it. Enlightened beings or enlightening beings. This is 2 translations of bodhisattva. Bodhi just means enlightened, sattva means being. So it could be an enlightened being, or it could be a being that enlightens. So it could either way. These enlightening beings are confused. Okay, I know you wouldn't say that. They're hopeless romantics, okay? Or, along a negative interpretation, they're stuck. They're kind of stuck in a rut here, and they're conditioned to keep repeating regardless of the result. So they make these vows to teach and transform, although there's really no living beings per se that exist. They are temporary phenomena, yet they do this. And at the same way, they're not attached. And so it's sort of like, and they keep doing this. And if you see in the Avatamsaka, or you do the 4 vows of the Bodhisattva, what is the first vow of the Bodhisattva? Anybody know? People recite it again and again and again. It's almost part of the liturgy. Hey, living beings what? Are boundless. I vow, I promise to liberate them all. And you're going, oh, wait a minute. So if they're boundless, how do you possibly liberate them all? I mean, we don't think of it, we just say these things, and you go, well, and later in this text in chapter 39, Sudna, young Sudna, is going around, he sees the problem here. And he says, wait a minute, they're boundless, you're about to liberate them all. How much time will that take? I mean, that's how he starts beginning questioning. And so this is it's not something you can kind of answer with the ordinary mind. It really, it's like a sort of a paralysis sets in if you try to comprehend it through ordinary reasoning. But let me just say here, one way to say that in fact they're obsessively stuck in this thing and they don't see the illogic of it. the thing, anything comes to mind where you're stuck in something, you keep doing it over and over again, and you never quite succeed? I think Einstein said something like that, to do something over and over again, and get not get the results is a kind of, I don't know, what was he, stupid maybe? Madness, yeah, kind of insanity. Okay. Anything come to mind, though, about this kind of activity? I always like to bring in things from other traditions, like the Western tradition as well, to sort of... Sisyphus? Who's Sisyphus? Yeah. So everybody knows Sisyphus or know about it? Okay, then I don't. It's so common. It's someone with a career, a job. Oops, sorry, no. It's someone who keeps going to school and acquiring degrees. It's the gods punish Sisyphus by making him roll this immense boulder up a hill, only when he got close to the top for it to roll back down again, and he'd have to do it, repeating this action. According to the myth, how long? For eternity. Yeah, these guys are really mean. So that influence on, say, on our modern culture means that we do things, tasks that are laborious and futile, and therefore they're described as Sisyphean. So we could say the first take on this is these bodhisattvas are either very confused and romantics mean they keep doing it again and again with the noble aspiration that it's going to produce these wonderful results. Or they're like Sisyphus and they're stuck and they can't get out of it. I don't buy either of these, but I thought I'd throw them out just for the process of elimination. The second possibility is they are awakened to something beyond or obscured to us. In other words, they are not only seeing things differently, they're seeing different things than we do. So as a result of that, they're actually following a rational, obvious path to them. It's not like it's romantic, and it's not like it's a hopeless, repetitive, obsessive behavior. They're actually responding to something that is very real and palpable and immediately before them. I used a quote last week of Thoreau, remember the different drummer, and basically say it again: if a person does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it's because he hears a different drummer, sees a different vision. Okay, you can use it. And then Thoreau's point is, don't make that person march to your drum. Don't make them march to the drums that they are not resonant with. This is a little tricky because it picks a little bit at what we consider social harmony or social conformity. Now, obviously, they can get too far out, and you can't just let everybody go down some really wild, crazy path. But there has to be more room in our lives to open up and tolerate the possibilities of creativity in people before we condition them and socialize them too much, to let them listen to and respond to these different drummers, so to speak. And he says, let him step to the music he or she hears, however measured or far away. Measured meaning whatever the syncopation is. It may not be the beat that we jive to, but that doesn't mean it's off. And it could mean, conversely, that it's more on than ours. I know this is hard to... So this is the Rose thing, and I point this out. I think bodhisattvas are marching to a music of a different drummer. And it's not the same one that ordinary living beings hear. It doesn't mean that they can't hear that, but their faculty of hearing is not attuned to that level of subtlety, sophistication. And this to me is one of the other meanings of those of you who looked at the Shurangama. The Dharma door recommended by Guan Yin, and the sages recommend their practices, is literally returning the hearing to listen within. This is the method Guan Yin advocates. And deeply listening within means not only to your own mind-body emotional matrix. But it also means when you deeply listen to that and you get in touch with your true nature, you're deeply listening without at the same time, because your true nature is one substance with all things and all beings. So this is where the breakthrough occurs. It seems like you're listening only within, but what it means is you're returning the hearing to listen to the deep, true self-nature. And when that is heard, then it unites. And so this idea of, Guan Shi Yin, the bodhisattva of great compassion. Guan means contemplate, or to observe, or to listen. Shi, world, yin, sounds. So the bodhisattva is listening, observing the sounds, listening to the sounds of the world. This is what they're marching to. This is what they're hearing. So they've done this practice, and in a sense, there's a gap between what they're listening to and what they're hearing and what we're listening to and what we're hearing. And you'll see this always in the text, whether it's the Tao Te Ching or Zhuangzi or whatnot. There's this sort of playful tension that exists between normality and, how shall I say it? It's not abnormality, it's a awakening. Normality and awakening, let's use it that way. I was thinking of the poet, Emily Dickinson. Her line is, "Much madness is divinest sense." And what she means by that is those who are really deeply in touch, she's using divinest sense, but say your deep spiritual nature seems like madness to those who are not in touch with it. So the trouble with this is once you start on this path, you start to get in tune. At first, that hearing is very soft. It's almost like you ignore it. It's a deep intuitive vibe. It's a sensibility. It's sort of out of the corner of your eye. It's not really loud. You kind of hear it. Oh, did I hear that? You know, it's your true voice, your true mind. And if it's covered over too long, it's almost impossible to hear it again. Sometimes in moments of insight or moments of stress, it can be heard. Sometimes you hear it by doing a long retreat, a 7-day retreat or something. As you get into the retreat and you drop away the static, the accumulated static, then this sound becomes really, really, really loud. And that's listening within to your true nature. So the hearing of this is not extraordinary, mystical, magical. The hearing of this is actually our own true sound. I mentioned Yeats, the poet Yeats, and he's got a wonderful poem where he talks about accessing this. And the way he accesses it is he goes back to this cottage on a lake. And think of Tao Yan Ming last week, we were reading him. He goes back to, he says, I'm going home. He goes back to some place in nature where, and it's interesting, a lot of people associate closeness with nature or a period of time in nature where all of a sudden, because of the silence of the world sounds, the natural sounds are in harmony with this deeper sound within, and they start to resonate and it comes up. Anyway, Yeats talks and he says, that last line of this poem, he says, I will arise and go now. Go now where? Well, he could be Tao Ming and going back home. And then he says, for always, night and day, I hear the lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. This is a metaphor. I hear day and night, walking, standing, sitting, lying down, day and night in my heart, in my soul. I hear this lapping of the true sound, the true connection with nature. While I stand on the roadway, or pavements gray, meaning concrete, asphalt in the city, I can't stop hearing it. And he says, I hear it in the deep heart's core. I hear it in the deep heart's core. Once you've connected to this sound in the deep heart's core, you'll never be able to listen to anything else in the same way. And this is it's like a beacon. I can use the metaphor of light. It's like a lighthouse that is there constantly, and goes, comes, but eventually you get your focus on that like a pole star, and you orientate. So the capacity for this hearing is varies. Bodhisattvas here, I mean H-E-R-E, here have really attuned that capacity. We've, among ourselves, maybe attuned it a little, maybe a lot. But this is the pathway back to true self, to awakening, is to attune to this. And what's interesting is it's not outside. It's not a sound you listen to externally. It's just the sound, the vibration of your true self, of your true being. I don't know how else, you can put it in poetic words, but those of you who had a flavor from this, it's unerring. It's really solid. It's very reliable. It's better than your best friend. And when you start to steer by this, you can actually, over time, and Confucius said by the time he was 70, it was so second nature to him, he didn't even have to think about it. And he could go and listen to that and follow that and not overstep. So I wanted to share passages from the Tao Te Ching. And it explains how the different capacities of people who hear this, for example, a sutra or a spiritual poem, and the different responses to it. And here's what the passage says. When people of the highest capacities hear of the way or hear the way, they do their best to put it right into practice. When people of middle capacities hear of the way, they have two minds about it. I love this passage. It's called ambivalent. Yeah, I'd like to go to the monastery, but then I'll miss out on the mall. I'd love to go to the mall, but then I'll miss out on the monastery. So my teacher once, said, this is like the person who's got 1 foot in a boat going upstream and 1 foot in a boat going downstream. Eventually, it'll tear you apart. You have to get, but there are two minds about it. And these two minds, we all know these two minds is like, oh yeah, there's a wonderful Guanyin session coming up at the city. I'd like to go, oh, but I promised I watched the Super Bowl, or I'd watch the World Series with my friends. Then you're watching the World Series, and what am I doing watching this? I could be everything going, back and forth. This is the two minds about it. So but you don't really follow. You follow a little bit, then you step back. So there's like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. It's a really the ambivalence dance. So the last 2 lines says, and when people of low capacity hear of the way, they laugh loudly at it. So the highest hear of it, boy, nothing else to do. The people in middle capacity do a cost-benefit analysis continually and never move. And when people of the lowest capacity hear of it, they laugh their teeth out. And the last line is, if they did not laugh, it would not be worth the name way. So this is from the Zhuangzi. My teacher had a wonderful expression, which he said, the translation of English is, listen to yourself. Listen to yourself. Think everything over. These are the 2 expressions. Listen to yourself, think everything over. What he meant by this is to really look into things. Really check things out clearly. Clearly look at things. Don't allow yourselves to be fuddled or sort of enamored or infatuated or freaked out. Just look at things almost clinically, objectively. And stop and contemplate is another way of saying this. Listen to yourself and look at things. Stop and contemplate. The opposite is, if you don't do this, life will go on. It just rolls on. And if you don't, and all of a sudden, it's starting to wind down and you're wondering, where did it all go? What's the song? Where's the time all gone to? Haven't done half the things I want to. Oh well. Oh well. So, there's a third possibility. And I brought this up earlier. And I said that these bodhisattvas behave in this way because they hear and see something differently than we do. And when they hear and see things like this, 2 things arise. The hearing and seeing like this is what we call wisdom or insight. And from that wisdom and insight, naturally arises compassion. It's not a rational, logical thing. It is like it just flows from the heart without any kind of stimulation other than seeing things as they really are. It's almost like a mother's regard for her child. When the child is suffering or whatnot, or the child is happy, I've seen both of that. Without an intermediate, as fast as lightning, the mother is responding. Without a thought, without a calculation. That kind of response of compassion is where the bodhisattva is coming from in encountering living beings. And that's why the third answer would be what they're doing is coming from compassion and commitment. Somehow they are doing this not because they're confused or romantic, not because they're obsessing, and even, yes, because they are seeing things differently, responding differently, but that leads to then this compassion and commitment. And so those vows continue. It's said in one of the texts, they are born again and again and again, not because of karma, but because of vows they return. So it's a whole different thing we're talking about here. I'm going to go into that second possibility and say maybe the text itself I see as taking an elaborate and nuanced analysis of reality as seen through the eyes of a sage. So in other words, when Universal Worthy is answering Manjushri, he's basically mapping out what bodhisattvas see. So to clarify this, he's actually doing an analysis in this text. And so he goes starting with the body. Okay, he says, when you look at your body, yourself, you see something. And what you see is, a number of things. You see a me, you see a mine, you see various characteristics, handsome, ugly, strong, weak, beautiful, whatever. And that varies from thought to thought, day to day, mirror to mirror. But you see something real and permanent and there as a me that you set up with. And when you attach to this, and what causes all this to arise? A mistaken movement of the mind. This is where the text is going. So it suggests that the enlightened being, or the being in light, and this is another way of looking at it, the being in light is going through a training that brings that person, that bodhisattva, to see all dharmas as they really are. So the enlightening process is a training. It's not just a magical thing that happens. It starts with precepts. It goes through levels of taming and training the mind, and finally produces these insights. So it's a training procedure. It's not, far out. And they see all dharmas as they really are, both at the beginning of this, and the more they go in, the more clear that becomes. They don't see them as they wish them to be, or they fear them to be, or fear them not to be. They see them, and the word that's used here in the text is thus, thusness. Without obstructions is the other expression. So a central quality of the bodhisattva throughout the Avatamsaka Sutra, and the Avatamsaka Sutra has a large devotion to describing the mind, the behavior, the vows, the activities of bodhisattvas. It's describing that throughout all their various worlds. They practice what's called prajna paramita, the perfection of patience, of wisdom. And it's a most deep state of knowledge in which the understanding of reality arises from three kinds of practice. So the training is, they start with literary. They start with learning. So in this sense, this exchange here is a literary exchange. Manjushri asks, worthy leader responds. We have it in text here. So we're looking at this and we're doing a literary apprehension. We're coming at it at the first level, the words pointing to meaning. Then there's another level called contemplative prajna. So literary prajna is textual, it's study, it's learning. Contemplative prajna comes from quieting the mind. When Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara was cultivating, practicing the prajna paramita, illuminating itself. So he's cultivating this deep meditative practice. The third level is actually when it becomes directly embodied. It doesn't even require contemplation anymore. It is thus to you. So these are the three, they're understanding and using this analysis, literary, contemplative, and directly embodied, to come at this. So that's why I go to the 6th verse now. If you look at the 6th verse, let's see, so the wise ones are able to observe. This is what's being talked about. The wise one, the prajnaparamita ones, are able to observe, to see things, the impermanence of all that exists. So all that we think that exists, to them, is just a fluid flow of atoms, molecules, configurations, none of which are permanent, fixed, and unchanging. They see that everything is that, not just the external world, but again, going back, all living beings. And that's why they say all living beings do not really exist, but only exist in a movement of configurations called the 5 skandhas. And all dharmas are empty, therefore have no nature of their own, lacking a self nature of their own. And they're forever detached from all characteristics. So they don't attach to these things. They see them, but they don't cling to them. They're able to work with them, but they're not undermined by them. This is where it's going. So the contrast to this would be sort of, if I could use, I think this is from the New Testament. I had to learn a lot of stuff when I was growing up. I think there's a line in the New Testament, something, I think it's, now we see through a glass darkly, is the expression. But when we finally get whatever that is that you get from that tradition, closeness, proximity, unity with the divine, then you see directly. So the glass darkly is sort of to have an obscure, imperfect vision of reality. So we see through fondness, we see through fear, we see through the lens of anger, lust, and more importantly, ego is what's being suggested here. Not as thus, not as is. So this is where the Heart Sutra really goes. These bodhisattvas, basically by calming these emotions, calming these desires and longings and fears, get to the point where they see there's no more impediments at all. And there's no more impediments because they see there's nothing to attain. I'm repeating the end lines of the Heart Sutra. When they cultivate in this way, they understand, because everything's empty, lacking, there's nothing to get or grab onto. This is a theme in these verses. And because there's no impediments, they're unafraid. And unimpeded in their mind, unafraid, leave detachments far behind ultimate nirvana. This is this equation as it goes through. We, on the other hand, if we're not contemplating in this training way, and it is a training because you can train to do this, but the habit energy, the karmic energy pulls. So there's this kind of half seen, half departing from, half seen, half departing from. We're in this sort of tension of polarization. And this is something one has to just be patient with, because eventually truth wins out. No, it doesn't win out quickly, but eventually it wins out. Or we just get tired of falseness and it wins out that way. I don't know, which way you want to approach it. But as a result, there's nothing in the way anymore. This has a physical, emotional side to it. You don't need to feel tight and twisted. You don't feel nervous or anxious. Your stomach's not in a knot. Your breath doesn't get stuck. You're not restless. All of these is a signs of no impediments. So don't just think about intellectually I have no impediments. It manifests in your body, your emotions. And in fact, if it's manifesting in the body emotions, it's still not there, truly. These are like good anointing advisors. When I see, when I fear, when I'm angry, when there's lust, whatnot, as soon as that arises, how fast? Just like that. Well, there's a good advisor. It's like the test saying, now you can afterwards say, well, I really didn't get moved by that. I really, I was really calm. I didn't get spooked and so forth. I wasn't really anxious, but you were. And the body and the emotions are like lightning. They're so fast. So that's why in cultivation, especially if you're doing retreats and whatnot, that's part of the inventory. That's part of the feedback mechanism that tells you. Mind and body, emotions, inner and outer, they're all interconnected. Each one can shine light on the other. So people think they have it. But then, and my teacher would always throw a test out like that. Oh, you think you have it? Why are you so stupid? Of all my disciples, no one is more stupid than you are. Look at what you did the other day. And all of a sudden the blush is coming and whatnot. Oh, did you have it or not have it? And he would do this, and it's sort of like the blush immediately showed you weren't there. So you also see this in the wonderful closing of the Platform Sutra, where he says to his disciples, I'm going to go, I'm dying, I'm going to leave tomorrow, I know my time and whatnot. And they all start crying. And he scolds them, he says, oh my God, you've been with me how many years studying? And now you're all crying. It shows you've not studied or learned anything at all, except for this little, who is it, Shen Hui, the youngest of them. He's maybe 10 or 11 at the time. He didn't shed a tear. And he said, he's got something. Now, you can imagine they all said, oh, Shen Hui was like, my Shen Hui. But the point was that hearing that the teacher was going to die, Shen Hui wasn't moved, not because he was cold and heartless, but because they understood the truth of impermanence, the truth of no self, and had got into some state of thusness. Now you're thinking, well, he was 7 or 8, 9 or 10, I'm 70, and I still don't know that well. Patience, patience. So we get spooked and we get tied up in this. Thus, I'm going to jump to verse 7th and 8th, okay? And now if you look at 7 and 8, karma produced. Because, and this is how it goes, because there's confusion, muddledness at these levels, intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, physically, because of confusion, karma is generated. Okay, remember, ignorance gives birth to activities, to karma. Then the myriad retributions follow. So ignorance, movement, unsteadiness gives rise to these intentional actions of body, speech, and mind, and then the resulting consequences roll from that. You're seeing the cause and effect model here. But then the passage says, like a dream, none of it is true or real. Thought after thought, constant decay brings cessation, and with the previous and subsequent patterns, as with the previous and subsequent patterns. So then, this like a dream, again, is this recurring phrase. Everybody here dream? Is there somebody who doesn't dream? I'm not asking a Zen question here, okay? Like, please, I'm just talking about when you close your eyes and go sleepy bye, do you go off to other places? See other people? Revisit your day? Have fantasies, fears? Almost psychedelic runabouts, right? And sometimes when you wake up, they stay for a while, but eventually they pass away. And then you go into the waking dream. So some people dream, but they don't remember they dream. Some people vividly remember. And when you're in the dream, if you've ever had this experience, sometimes it's more real than a real experience you have in life. It's so powerful. So when it says like a dream, none of it is true or real, it's a very interesting phrase. It seems true and real while we're having it. But in fact, we wake up and we realize, oh, it wasn't true or real. Now, sometimes that's a disappointment, depending on what the dream was. And sometimes it's a great relief, depending on what the dream was. And sometimes, even in your dreams, you can have sweat and palpitations of your heart. And if you've ever watched the movies that are done by psychologists who study dreams, people shake and move around. You can even get bruises because you're so active, feeling that this is actually happening to you. So this is a very interesting thing. I was thinking of, again, Shakespeare has many allusions to the dreaming in contrast with reality. But there's this one, you all know Romeo and Juliet? I mean, the play. Not the movie, please, the play. Okay. So Romeo says to Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet, Romeo says, I dreamt a dream tonight. And Mercutio says, well, so did I. And Romeo says, well, what was yours? Mercutio says, that dreamers often lie. Don't tell the truth. And Romeo says, oh, in bed asleep, while they do dream, things are true. In a sleep, they dream things they think are true. But Mercutio's response is that dreamers often lie. So this is funny, this is wonderful play here. The other part, of course, you know, is from The Tempest. You should read The Tempest. It's a wonderful, wonderful play by Shakespeare, right? But it has to do with the intertwining of the real and the imaginary. You know, the fantasy and the fact. It takes place on this island, and there's all these magical transformations that occur because of the wizard and so forth and whatnot. But at the end of the play, Shakespeare himself says, through one of the persons, he says, our revels now are ended, our revelries. It means our dreams are now ended. And these are actors, we're all spirits and melted into thin air. Into thin air. Now, and like the baseless fabric of this vision, the baseless emptiness, not real fabric of this vision, and again, you could just take this and say that's a Buddhist phrase. The baseless fabric of our visions. It's a fabric of visions we have. We project on a screen through when we're asleep or we're awake, and we have this whole narrative, but it's a baseless fabric. There's nothing to it. And you could think of a screen as a baseless fabric. We project onto the screen, right, all these lights and pixels and whatnot, but the fabric itself is baseless. And the projections themselves have no nature of their own. They're just running by. Now, I used to use the one I was growing up with film, because film goes, right, little, everybody know? I mean, you guys are old enough to know what film is. There's another group of people who have no idea what film is, because it's all done in a digital variation now. So when I say, like, how do they use expression? Expressions that had to do with reels and film are almost gone to the modern consciousness. But anyway, if you take 100 of these images and you just break them into, and you run them together, it actually looks like something's really there going on, like a horse running, for example, but it's just a bunch of stationary things. So you have a fabric of a vision occurring because of the thing going fast like that. This is in fact what we are doing with the unawakened conscious mind. It is actually fabricating and pulling together on the barest basis of what's there, a whole narrative, a whole perceptual field. This is, we're getting into Yogacara now. And to us, it seems absolutely real until we have moments of insight from meditation, until something shifts and suddenly it starts to melt into thin air. At the point of dying, this thing unravels really quickly, really quickly. And I'm not just talking about the imagination, I'm talking about the real perception of it starts to melt and fade into nothingness again. In any event, so he's saying these towers we had, the gorgeous palaces, the temples, the globe itself that we created on this island, but the globe itself is also the theater, the Globe Theater so he's using this wonderful double thing. He says, as we take away the staging, the props and the costumes and the actors, we're left with thus. So he says, all which you inherit shall dissolve. So now he just comes back. He says, just as the stage and props are gone, just as this mirage and fantasy is gone, it's like you've been in a movie theater, or if you're sitting in front of your television in a movie theater, it's dark, and you really get absorbed into this thing. Your heart's pounding, and all of a sudden the lights come on, and it's over. Or it used to happen when we were kids, we were in a theater, 25 cents, we're watching it, cheap theater, the tape breaks, the lights come on. And you were right in the middle where the hero was leaping across the cliff and your heart was, and it's all gone. There's nothing. So he says, all that you inherit shall dissolve. Now this means your body. I mean, I'm doing a Buddhist take on this. It means your body, you inherited it. You did? Yes. You put it together? No. Okay. You inherited it. It's on loan, so to speak. It's like a library thing. You got it on loan. When's the due date? Ooh, I'm going to get charged. And just like he says, this insubstantial pageant faded, leaves not a rack behind. Everything just dissolves at that point. And then this famous line, we are the stuff as dreams are made on. We are the stuff of dreams are made on. We are dreamers. And our little life is rounded with a sleep. This is how he ends that passage from The Tempest. Now, this is Shakespeare observing both impermanence and substantiality of things. So these are not Buddhist thoughts per se. These are observations that an awakened person can have, that an artist can have, a child can have. But how you work with these, how you work through this into something that isn't just absolutely dark, empty, and over, is where the bodhisattva sees and hears a different thing. And that's why they're responding and doing what they're doing. They're not responding out of fondness or fear anymore. They're responding out of wisdom. They're actually living the real life, which to us seems mystical and far out. Anyhow, let me see if I can finish up on this. It does lead to something, too, that sometimes is misunderstood. When I first came to the monastery, I think one of my sisters said, "Oh, you're escaping reality, aren't you?" And I hadn't thought. Well, in a way, I was, because reality wasn't that great. I thought. I mean, and I try to experience as much as I can by the age of 29, and I thought it was highly overrated. Reality, what people call reality. That being the case, I didn't think I was going to the monastery to escape reality. And in fact, what a monastery does, if correctly conducted, it brings you face to face with reality. Then the opposite, you don't escape it. In a sense, all the props and everything. So the monastic, to help understand the monastic thing, because people say it's renunciation. They see monks and nuns as renunciants. From the point of view that we're talking here, they aren't renouncing. They are actually unencumbering themselves so they can move freely. It says like a deer in the woods or like a bird in space. So the getting rid of the hair, the makeup, the clothes, changing that, dropping possessions down, the jewelry, the drugs, the alcohol, the partying, all these things that are part of the props of the play, they see as encumbrances to seeing things and being really who they are, either as escapes themselves, so reality then becomes an escape from true, or they see it as interferences with hearing, the scene we were talking about early, listening closely. So even, the party, the Botox, whatever it is that is holding the theater together, they're very interested in getting down to what is not artificial. So that's why they're doing it. They're not doing it as a penitent, renunciant thing, hoping that to atone for their sins or that the gods will smile on them for sacrificing themselves and reward them with things. It has nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. If they are bowing and repenting, they're not repenting in the sense that they're afraid of being punished for what they did, but they're bowing because they understand they are punished by what they did. It's a very different approach. So you're not punished for losing your temper, but you're punished by losing your temper. It's an internal mechanism. There's no external agency doing that. So that's why if you understand the rituals and the practices, say in a monastery, the clothing and everything, you can see this as a profound act of liberation. And in fact, the Vinaya code that they recite, the pratimoksha, means root of liberation. It doesn't mean root of obedience necessarily or root of repression, but it means by following these, you're getting what the texts call vimutti rasa, a taste of freedom, a taste of liberation. So that's why it seems so contrary. On the other hand, at least in my experience, my own personal experience, the more I accumulated, whether it was camera, guitar, clothes, whatever, the more burdened over time I felt. It's very funny, and the less satisfying each of those was. Ironically, paradoxically, the more I let go of, the more fulfilling and free I felt. Now, I'm not in the monastery anymore, but the methodology or the equation remains. So each extra thing that I acquire that I don't really need becomes a little anchor, a little chain. And pretty soon you're drowning. And you not only can't hear the sound anymore, you can't even see anything. So I will end up there for tonight and continue into this hopefully next week and see if I can finish these up. And I also want to share part of the commentary my teacher did this week, a wonderful commentary on the contemplation of the body. So, any questions? Any comments? I know some of you submitted responses, and I'll get to them next week again on the Tao Yan Ming poem, I'm Going Home. My fields and gardens are choked. And I ran over again on time, but no questions, comments, observations? Yes?
I don't know how to ask this question, but...
I might not know how to answer that question either.
Well, maybe it's redundant, but what do the bodhisattvas hear or see when they see living beings?
That's a very interesting question. Anybody have a thought of that? In other words, let's go the opposite. When we see living beings, it's through the lens of a me and a mine and an attachment. So we either see them as objects of our desires, possibly fulfilling our desires, or objects of our aversion. But we analyze them as things outside that either are going to bring us pleasure or pain, almost in a transactional way. It gets less so with very close relationships between mother, father, child, and so forth. That changes, it's not. And yet, there's still a huge amount of attachment there between. So on one hand, it's seemingly altruistic, and on the other hand, the ego gets invested very directly in the child. And so there is this bond of both love and kindness, but also huge expectation and anxiety. I'm just sort of being honest. So what does a bodhisattva see? It's very interesting questions. A line from the Avatamsaka says, like all Buddhas, they awaken to the truth of no self, and they see all beings and all worlds as the same as themselves. They see no difference between all beings and all worlds and themselves. Now, that doesn't really describe it exactly, because we're so caught up and we see difference. We are, by our cultivated conditioned nature, discriminators. Okay, there's two things that describe living beings. Absolute discrimination. this, that, good, bad, whatnot, and grasping and seeking. Even before birth, the living being, at the earliest stages, is grasping and seeking. And the grasping and seeking continues throughout. So grasping and seeking and discriminating is the world that we are in. It's the lenses we are wearing, and everything we see through that is a grasping and a discriminating mind. They don't have that going anymore. So they see living beings who are not grasping or rejecting. The closest I can get is sort of like a really professional physician who sees patients and sees them as objectively, almost analytically, as this is what is going on, needs to be corrected and whatnot. Doesn't wish to form a relationship and doesn't reject. Just says, here's, and then when the work is done. I think of my family physician when we were kids. We go sometimes, in those days, you could go to the physician's house. You're sick at night. Kind, compassionate, but not sticky. Respond to you, sew you up or whatever, and put a needle in, give you a lollipop, and send you home. So saw other beings as sort of universal souls, bodies looking for healing and health. That was one image that comes to mind. And you see this again in the sutras where the Buddhas and bodhisattvas are compared to physicians. So it's that impartial, objective, and yet immensely caring thing that's going on. Because sometimes impartial objective means, they don't see living beings, they don't regard them. They do regard them. The bodhisattva who regards the beings of the world is Guanyin. But regarding is not rejecting, nor is it attaching. So we can use words and thoughts to get around this, but the actual vision of what that is, as the text says, it can be known but not described. It can be experienced but not expressed. But whatever that is, it must be incredibly powerful, liberating, and in a way, what leads to non-retreat, leads to the craziness of saying they're boundless and I vow to stay at this. Whatever that is, comes out of that vision. So that it's not necessarily a great answer, but it's just I'm kind of free thinking here about what that be. But I think your point is right. When Huineng went to his first teaching, the abbot of that monastery asked him, what did you get? What did you receive? What samadhis? What did you talk about when you were given certification? And he said, we didn't talk about any of that. He said, what'd you do? We just talked about seeing, S-E-E-I-N-G. So, and that's what the thus part means. Somehow it's beyond words and language, and yet it's not beyond the deepest and best human experience one could have. I don't know how else to say that. I think the text is probably coming as close as you're going to get to describing what they see. I don't know if there's any movie that could be or has been done, to actually say this is what they see. When you try, it comes up really flat. It really comes up flat. There's just, sometimes I watch these movies like, who was it? Keanu Reeves, is that his name? Is that a name? Yeah. Where he played Siddhartha. And then they try to represent what they see. It's like some acid trip. It's just like, that's not what they see. They don't see everything flowering and melting and flowing around, and they go, ooh. No, that's not what they see. I imagine it might be something closer to, I remember in biology, when I put something on that plate and got the microscope and go, oh, now I see thus. I see what's there. There's all these little bacteria things floating around in a single drop of water, or in my spit, and go, oh my. That is a kind of scene. So, and could I say I want it to be prettier or I want to reject? No, that's just what it is. There it is. So, something like that. Anyhow, good question. Yes?
I see bodhisattva quality.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I see bodhisattva quality
Yes.
among doctors and nurses that work in conflict zones, they see the suffering and they do whatever they can to alleviate the suffering. And also, even though they volunteer to work in a conflict zone, I don't see them as reckless. They are really selfless,
Mm-hmm.
and they do whatever they can do. And I really have a lot of respect for them. So I see bodhisattva.
That's a good example, I think. Whether they're really bodhisattvas or not, they certainly have all the markings of that mentality and that spirit. But not all who are doctors are also that. So you can be trained as a doctor to be able to work like you're talking about, or you can just work in Los Angeles and fix noses so they look better on movies. I'm sorry. So it's like the profession itself doesn't make the bodhisattva, but the bodhisattva makes the profession. So there is something called right livelihood, and clearly some professions just are not right livelihood. It's very hard to imagine that you can do right livelihood making biochemical weapons of mass destruction, okay? But medicine, law, nursing, even in business, you can either make it a bodhisattva path or you can make it a demonic path. It's all made from the mind. So I think you have a good point that would be something that's close to bodhisattvas. And then you start to think, do they ever tire? Where's the burnout? So one of the markings of a bodhisattva, like you're describing, would be the 4 Brahma Viharas, which we talked about earlier. They have a kindness and compassion that is, I would say, intrinsic, not transactional. And then the other 2, they have a joy. So it's not like, oh my God, I'm putting my time, I'm bearing my cross, I'm in this oh boy, It's actually, they find joy in doing that, and they find misery in not doing it. That's why they do it. And then finally, the most important, they have equanimity throughout. This is that objectivity, that caring detachment, detached caring. That is. And the interesting thing about that is detached caring is the best kind because it doesn't make you feel obligated and burdened by the gift that you got. If it's not detached caring, you feel a sense of, oh, I owe it. I've been given, now I'm in debt. So the actual detached caring is the highest form of giving because it doesn't expect a return, and the person who receives it doesn't feel burdened by the need to return it. They are truly freed by the gift. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Okay, good questions, good observations. Let's do the transference. No announcements, Locke? Anything? Do you know when everybody's coming back from China? Okay. I don't mean everybody from China coming here. I'm just like, we have 3 of our monks are in China, but no, so I think they'll be maybe back by next weekend because it's been about 2 weeks, hasn't it? Okay. Heng Sure will have lots of pictures, I'm sure, to show you because last time I talked to them yesterday, they were on Wutai Mountain, Manjushri's way place mountain. Okay, let's do the transference in English. Impermanence. May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. Become compassionate and wise. Bow in respect to the triple jewel.